Um, Thank you, Jared. It was a wonderful lunch, and I appreciate all the kind words. And thank you all for coming out this early on a Friday morning. I know it's always been hard for me, but this is a great opportunity, and thank you so much for those that I know in different areas that have coming out to support me today. Thank you. Um, so, a lot of you probably know me as the founder and president of Paul's Place Support for Families. Our tagline is "At Home While Away from Home." I'll get into that story a little bit later. A lot of you have heard that story, but this goes beyond that. So a little bit about me and my family. My oldest daughter there with her knee up, you'll hear about her story as well. She's a sophomore now at UT Austin, that's where I graduated. That's her on her motorcycle. Crazy year, motorcycle was stolen in June while I happened to be in Austin, Texas, so that was kind of fun to actually be there for her again and be there when she needed me, but she ended up having to get rid of that bike anyway. And then there's my middle daughter, Isabel. She is what I call my mini-me. She is very quiet at first and just very observing, and then she's just goes run, heads into everything, and like, I'm gonna do it my way kind of thing. So I love her dearly. I love them all dearly. And that's her in the corner in the blue. She actually graduated this past June from East Allen University, so she has an associate's degree and a high school diploma all at the same time. So now she's actually a freshman at Purdue Fort Wayne, finishing up for environmental sciences. So I have two in college now. I can't believe that. And then there's my little man, Beckett. He is another picture of him when he was younger. He's got the big cheeks like his dad did. So he's my protector. Really, you hear that story too. And there's my fur babies. The cat, of course, just lounging on top of the fireplace. She's traveled back and forth with me to Austin. And then our dog, which sadly we had to put down the day Isabel graduated from high school. So he was a wonderful pet. Kids loved him, kids adored him, and they he was so fun to be there. So that's a little bit about my family, why I do what I do, and be a role model for them as well. And here's a little bit about me. Like I said, you know me about Paul's Place. In order to pay my bills now, I set up my own company, Torrez Enterprises. You'll hear about that in a little bit. And of course, like I said, I went to University of Texas in Austin, and you'll hear that story as well. I was in Hollywood last summer for a couple times. And so I was working on music and film production, and so that's why there's the green screen. I know Scott Drummond and I have talked a lot about different things, and music and film production a little bit there, so I have a lot of combining a lot of likes and passion things that I do with my skills of organizing and asking for money, basically is what I do. Some of my college friends that I met when I was in LA, actually when I took a picture of Hollywood sign, and one of their children. So it was great to reconnect with them as well, and they actually help watch over my baby in Austin, Texas too. So definitely great connections that I met in Austin, Texas, and they're just following my family and protecting my family as well and being there for them, and that's why I've absolutely adored them since the beginning. And then earlier this year, I was actually named as one of the semifinalists for the Pioneer Awards. So if some of you may have been, I think some of you were there and saw that, but I was one of the final 8 semifinalists there. So that was definitely one thing that I'm definitely proud to have achieved and be selected for that. So going into it, as I was thinking on what to write or what to talk about today, I was on my morning walk, my exercise, and I'm going down this path, and I'm like, oh, I love it. It's, okay, well, first I'll say, what do you think of when you see this? A little bit of interaction, so shout something out. Peace, yes, that's what I thought too. For some, it could mean it's a lonely path. It's no one's here, I'm by myself, I'm all alone. That's definitely a way you can look at that picture as well. And then, of course, what I know from film, if you adjust everything, darken it up a little bit, it could be scary. You know, we're going into Halloween now, so, you know, take out all the color, it's darker, it could be a very scary road with treacherous things jumping out at you at any time. So that's what we call perspective, really. And that's why I've said to a lot of people, too, you know, depending on what you're going through, you really have to look at things at different perspectives. So it could be either dark and scary, it could be peaceful, or it could just be lonely. It's the same picture, just different perspectives put around it. Same situation, but just different things you might want to look around and say something different or see something different. So going through some of the obstacles, it really started, I guess, when I went to college down at UT Austin. In high school, I graduated like 15th in my class from Bishop Luers High School. I was always top of my class from grade school all the way up. I didn't really need to study. I just, I enjoyed school, and I was very intelligent. And I thought, okay, I'll go down to UT. It's a business school. It's a lot of numbers and lots of different things. I got this, no problem. So I joined an organization. I founded another organization, 2 organizations while I was there on campus. I worked full time because then after a year I went and lived off campus. And so I was doing lots of different things, being the social butterfly, figuring out, what to do, creating new families and friendships there. And so after 3 semesters, the school said, hey, you're not focusing on school, so you need to leave. So I actually flunked out of college. So definitely not something that my parents were happy about. But that was something like, why did I do that? Why am I doing everything else? Yes, that's very important to make these connections and to feel and to do life and understand things, as long as you understand why you're doing it and what happened, and learning through everything. And so I drove home. I had to pack everything up in my car. I drove home to Indiana and was there for about 7 months. And then it just kind of sat stewing with me. I know I could do better. I know I shouldn't have flunked out. I should have focused more on school. It's a lot different. Time management, like you say, time management is all about college there. Figuring out what you can do, what you should be doing, what you should not be doing. So I went there for school. I knew that was the main reason why I should have been there and doing. And so I threw everything in my car, gave my job 2 weeks notice, and took off back to Austin. My mom was kind of halfway happy about that because her baby was leaving again, but she knew this is what I wanted to do and what I needed to do to go and finish up what I started. So I start the journey down to Austin, and by this time I'd done like 6 trips by myself. I'm 18 at this time, 18, 19, going from Austin, Texas to Fort Wayne. That's an 18-hour drive if you drive it straight. Sleep in rest stops, whatever. And go in there. So I knew the route. Everything was there. Back when we had paper maps, print out the Google Maps. That's my time frame. So I was undaunted. I wasn't scared about driving back and forth by myself. Very, very, very adventurous in that aspect. So get to Little Rock, Arkansas, and the engine light comes on in my car. And the car at the time, this was 1993, so the car I had was a 1984 Chevy Cavalier, much older car. It was paid for, didn't have any car payments or anything, so I'm like, okay, well, I'm low on gas anyway. Let me just fill up on gas, and then I'll open the trunk or the hood and see what's going on. Not that I really knew what was going to happen, but so I opened the hood, and what I saw was not good. And so what I saw, the engine, I swear to you, was glowing, pulsating red. So I'm like, oh, that's not good at all. So I closed it, got away from the pumps, and got into, there was a McDonald's right there at the gas station. I'm like, I'm just going to eat food, let the car cool. I'll call my friend that's down there and say, my mentor, I'm like, hey, I'm stuck in Little Rock, Arkansas, so it's probably a good 6 or 7 hours from Austin, Texas. Definitely way too far to turn back and go back to Indiana. And I said, hey, told him what was happening, and he's like, yes, don't touch anything. Don't unscrew the lid or the water cap or anything. He's like, when it cools, add some water, add some oil, and try and make it here. He's like, call me if you need anything else. So I did that. Sat there for an hour, 2 hours, let it cool. It was not pulsating, glowing red anymore. So upon the kind of touching it, it was not hot. So I added water, added oil. That's definitely what it needed, was oil. So, and then I kind of started back on my journey. Got back into Austin probably about 2 a.m. So I was going to actually stay with my mentor's sister. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to wake her up at 2 in the morning, so I'm just going to stay at a hotel. And it was probably it was the cheapest hotel. So definitely not the safest hotel. And so when I told my friend where I was, and the next morning, he's like, why didn't you call me? He's like, this is not the place to be. He's like, come on, get out of here. So we went. So I went to his sister's house. And that's kind of how I really started my journey back in Austin of going through a long drive, a physical journey, having obstacles on that physical journey, and like, okay, well, I can't go there. I'm not too far away. There's really nothing I can do. I have enough money to get an apartment when I'm there. So I'm just gonna wait it out and see what happens. And it was kind of scary, but it was like, this is what happens when you travel across country. So stuff like this might happen. So I kind of kept that perspective of like, stuff happens, kind of figure out the best solution for it, and then just move on from there. See what the best efficient way to go from there. So I went from there. Stayed there, worked in Texas for a year before I went back to school because it was going to be cheaper. But by the time that happened, it was actually still the same price of what I was paying before as out-of-state tuition. So I went back to school, got my grades back up, and continued and finished in college. But in the meantime, of course, a few months into it, I was seeing somebody, and that I had to call my mom. I said, that phone call that every mother of a teenage or young adult woman dreads to hear if they're not officially married, is that I was pregnant. So the baby's father, we were together. He's like, okay, we'll go through this. We'll raise a child, support you with whatever you need. And within 10 days after I told him and I realized I was pregnant, I miscarried. So kind of a relief a little bit, but then very sad. I'm like, well, I was kind of excited now for this new life to happen and for me to finish school despite, being pregnant. That was my main goal. So I went through that. And then, of course, within a week of that happening, the baby's father just kind of ghosted me. Never heard from him again. So I'm like, well, that was probably the best thing really that happened. If he walks away from that, then that's definitely a sign that should not have happened. So I continued, like I said, with my school journey, and then I finished college, I walked in May of 1999. My father actually had been living in South Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley, near Brownsville, McAllen area, if you know that area. And so that was in May, and then in September, he calls me up, and he's come back and forth before. He's visited me, or we've met in Houston a couple times, and he says, "Hey, I'm actually in the hospital in Houston. The doctors want you to come up for the weekend." That's how he said it, and I know some of you know this story. So I go. I'm like, I'm 3.5 hours away. I've just finished graduating. I just graduated college, and I'm kind of still trying to figure out where I'm at, what kind of job, or I'm interviewing for different things right at this point. So no official corporate job yet. And so I go. I spend the weekend with him, and when I get there, the doctors are like, he's been diagnosed with lymphoma. Is actually kind of brought upon from the anti-rejection medication from his heart transplant, actually, which he had at Lutheran Hospital. But not this location, the one on Fairfield, for those of you who know when that was exactly. So he was the 52nd heart transplant here in Fort Wayne. So when he was there in Houston, they're like, okay, we're just going to give him medicine for the weekend and kind of see where it goes from there. I'm thinking, okay, they're just going to formulate a game plan for over the weekend, and then they'll let me know what happens on Monday or what the plan is. No, that's not what they thought. They were like, he's too far gone. He's probably not going to make it the weekend. We'll see if he makes it the weekend, then we'll formulate a plan. That's really what was going on there. And so Monday came, he made it through the weekend. They're like, great, let's kind of keep going and see where this is going. And so for 2 weeks, he kind of regained his strength. And they said, after the 2 week, his oncologist said, he's strong enough now to go through chemotherapy. Do you want to do that? And my dad, of course, was like, sure, why not? Like, just get an injection on that and put a Band-Aid on and you're good to go. So that's what we did. And in the meantime, I knew I was actually staying with my mentor's nephew, who was a medical student at the time. So I'm like, okay, I need to find a place to live or a place to stay. I can't stay here the whole time. If this is going to be 3 days on and 3 weeks of recovery, my dad's not strong enough to travel back to Austin, and he's definitely not strong enough to travel back to his home in South Texas. So the nurses at the time was asking me, well, we knew you're from Austin, he's from South Texas. What happens? Where are you staying at? So I told them, and they're like, well, we can do a lot better than that for you. So the next day, they actually came in with a set of keys and an address. And the address was actually the same apartment complex I was already at, where my friend was at, which is within walking distance of the hospital, but on the other side of the complex. So I'm like, oh, this is perfect. I don't have to move across town or anything. And so it was a fully furnished apartment that was provided by a church in the area for families in our situation who had to travel to Houston to receive medical treatment, but needed to stay long term, but couldn't afford a hotel, couldn't afford another apartment or a house or anything like that. So they provided that temporary housing for families in this situation. So that was really how where I lived for the next 6 months. My father continued to do extremely well with the treatment. He was going 3 days a week or not going, he was already there. He was receiving treatment 3 days out of the week, and then actually he was strong enough after the third treatment to be released from the hospital in between his treatments. So now he was able to come back to a home-like environment in between his chemotherapy treatments and kind of rest and really get the formal rest that he really needed. Because if you've ever stayed in the hospital, there's beeping and noise and nurses talking and people running in and out, and your cuff is going off every 30 seconds or whatever it seems like. And so you really can't get a lot of rest inside the hospital. So now when he was able to come out of the hospital, stay in the apartment, he really got the rest he needed, which I think helped him get through the chemotherapy treatment. So we actually had to go to a second apartment because it was smaller, but another family needed the 2-bedroom that we were in. So I said, oh, sure, absolutely, fine. We'll go to a smaller apartment. It still had 2 twin-size beds, so he could still sleep in an area and I wasn't stuck on the couch again. So we went through that. After the 5th treatment, the doctor said they went through his scans. They said we don't see any more lymphoma in his system. So he went from not being able to survive the weekend to surviving that weekend and then kicking the cancer. So that was an amazing story, amazing news that we heard, but they're like, okay, we're just gonna do one more treatment just to make sure we got it all, and then we'll release you. So then I'm like, okay, so I'll get an apartment here. I've actually been interviewing with the Houston Rockets. That was my dream job is to be in the NBA, to work in the NBA, not play. And not that athletic with basketball. Back then in 92, 93, or 98, 99 actually, that was actually the year for the lockout, one of the first lockouts that happened. Actually, there were the second one. I think the NHL was the first one, and basketball was the second one. But the NBA was the huge marketing machine at the time. And so that was my dream job, is to go into marketing, work with I love sports. So, I wanted to match that. So I was interviewing with the Houston Rockets, and when my dad was sick, I realized, okay, well, I can't do that, because if I'm going into sales, I'm here 8 to 5, and then on game nights, I'm there till 10, 11 o'clock at night sometimes, for 3 or 4 days out of the week, and really busy like that during the season. And I'm like, if my dad needs the care, I can't do that. So I pulled away from the interview process, and I said, unfortunately, this is the reason. They said, okay, if things change, let us know. We'd be happy to talk with you again. So I ended up getting a job on hospital campus organizing lunches and asking for money. So that's what I did. And so right before he went to his last treatment, he's like, okay, I'm going to go home for a week. The doctors didn't really want him to do that, but he was insistent on doing that. And so he did. And so when I picked him up from the airport, when he came back, he looked extremely tired, very run down. I said, Dad, you did way too much. He's like, I know. He's like, but I had to do it. I had to get stuff done. And so as I'm moving from the temporary apartment into my full own apartment, the last load I had, I heard that he was in the restroom. I'm like, okay, well, I'm just gonna lay down, rest for a few minutes, and then I'll see if he wants lunch or something. So when I opened the door to the bedroom area, I knocked on the bathroom. He didn't answer. I could hear the water running. I'm like, wait, the water was running when I came in 15 minutes ago. I'm like, this is not good. So I knocked again. I said, Dad, are you okay? No answer. So I opened the door, and he's on the floor. Called 911 immediately. They worked on him for a good half hour, got him to the hospital and called the oncologist, and basically they said he was probably gone before he hit the floor. It was just a massive heart attack. He did beat the cancer. He did survive that first weekend. And what doctors told me then was when he received his heart transplant in 1990, in May of 1990, they usually only give you 5 years. This was now March of 2000. So he doubled his lifespan with that transplanted heart, developed lymphoma, made it through the weekend, made it through all the treatment, and the lymphoma was gone, but unfortunately all of that harsh treatment was just too much for his transplanted heart, so he had a heart attack. So that's where Paul's place comes in. So I go back home. I'm 5 months I was not working, so I have hardly any money. I only worked for a month in order to get this apartment, and devastated. I went from taking care of my dad 24/7 for 5 months to now he's not here. What do I do now? So I come back home and financially, emotionally, mentally get back to where I needed to be. It took about 2 years financially to get back on my feet. And I was ready to come back to Austin. And then I met my then husband. He was actually a Mexican citizen, and he couldn't find what he needed here. There's too much stuff happening, so he was going to go back home to Mexico. But then we met, so we're like, well, hey, let's see where this goes. Let's see what happens. So within a few months, we're like, yes, this is actually everything we've kind of been looking for in a partner and a spouse, whatever. And so we like, okay, we'll get married. And it wasn't because of the situation or anything. It was a genuine marriage. And he's like, but I'm still going to go to Mexico, and because I'm going to see my family one last time, or for a long time anyway, and then I'll come back here. He's like, if you want, you can just come down to Mexico. We can kind of elope, but of course your parents will know. I'm like, okay, let's do that. So he's like, okay, I'll find out what we needed, forms, what you need and everything to come back and do that. So we got everything together. By the time I went down 6 weeks later, I went into his hometown, way up in the mountains in Guanajuato State. They had literally just gotten plumbing like 2 years before that. So that's how high up in the mountains where he's from. So I get there, and he's like, okay, so now the court is saying that we can pay this fee and get married. He's like, but that fee is what we were going to use to go on our honeymoon in Puerto Vallarta. He's like, or we can just go to Puerto Vallarta and just get married at the courts when I get back to Indiana. I'm like, okay, let's do that. So we did that. We had great time in Puerto Vallarta. I was there for 2 weeks. I came back home. We still talked and everything. And then after a few days, I'm feeling sick. Of course, in Mexico, I'm like, oh, must have drank the water, had the ice cubes melted or whatever, and picked up a bug or whatever. So I go to the doctor and explain, I just come back from Mexico, I'm not feeling right, stuff is happening. And they're like, oh, okay. So they did test whatever, and they're like, no, you don't have a bug, you're pregnant. I'm like, oh, okay. So I told him, and he comes back within a week. And, we're staying with my mom. We're saving up money to get our own place because we got a new family coming, and things are going well. But then towards the middle of the pregnancy, stuff's not happening right. The doctors are like, you've got a stressful job. I was working in logistics at the time, a logistics company. So they're like, you need to leave work in order for the baby to survive. I said, okay, let's do that. So he was working. He did what he needed to do. And then baby was born, or going into that, we had 17 hours. I had 17 hours of labor, and they're like, the baby's not progressing right. Let's do emergency C-section. So we did that, and I think it was here in Lutheran, this hospital. So she was amazing. She was awesome. No other side effects or anything afterwards. She's 6 pounds, 7 ounces. She was my little bundle of joy. And holding her for the first couple times when I first got home, just tears pouring. I'm like, I can't believe how much love I feel just for this baby here. And so our life was great, actually, for about 2 weeks. And then my husband lost his job. So here, I'm not working. I haven't been working for a while. He lost his job. He's having a hard time finding work. And we're like, you know what? We just got to suck it up and figure out where we can work. He worked at McDonald's because it was money. That's what we needed to do, and that's what we had to do for us to get back on track. And so from there, everything went well. Another daughter was born couple years later. Life was going on. Life was great. Third child comes around. Actually, no, I take that back. Before that, probably September, October of 2008, get the news again, I'm pregnant. I'm like, okay, great, third child. Hopefully we'll get your son that you wanted. So we go from there. And of course, within 10 weeks, 10 days again, I lose the baby. And so knowing that I've had 2 children now and going through a miscarriage again, it hits different. You've got 2 little ones, 4 and 5, that you still have to take care of, but you're still mourning what would have been your 3rd child, or 4th child technically. And so that was a mix of emotions there. And so I kind of get through that. We both get through that. And then February, March of the following year, so within 4 or 5 months, I find out I'm pregnant again. So now, definitely mixed emotions, very cautious, very intrepid of what's going to happen. Will I keep this one? Will I lose this one again? What's happening? But I carried my son, ends up being the son. We found out this time, okay, you're going to have a son this time. I said, okay, that's it then. My son is born, and it's very bittersweet, because if I had kept that 3rd child, he wouldn't have been around, or maybe it could just be different. But it hits different when you've gone through 2 miscarriages and you've already had 2 children, or now this is your 3rd, and so it's just a lot of emotions going through that. And so just life kind of just went on from there. It was a great, everything seemed to be working well. And then in October of 2015, so many years later, actually no, I take this back. A couple of things I forgot to mention was, well, I did mention my husband was not a U.S. citizen. Within first 2 years, we tried to get his status adjusted. We paid a local lady in the community to help us get through that. She's like, okay, 50% down, and then after it's completed, you get me the rest of the money. When we gave her that 50% down, we never heard from her again. A couple $1,000s gone. So we waited another year or so. We tried it ourselves. We went down to Indianapolis and tried to get that done. This was after our 2 daughters were born. And immediately they denied us. No, he's been here too long. You can't do it. Rules are changed where you can't, you just can't do this anymore. So we're like, okay, well, another $4,000 or $5,000 down the drain there. So after my son is born, we're like, laws are changing again. We knew by the time he had to renew his driver's license, something was going to happen, and it wasn't going to be good. So we decided, okay, we'll go to the lawyers again. We'll hire a lawyer this time. And they recommended that the best case option for us at this time would be for him to self-deport. So saved up as much money we could, and then we started that process, so this official process he had to go through. So he did that. We anticipated him being gone 6 to 8 months at a time, or for that time frame. Ended up being 14 months. So part of that, towards the end of that, I took my son down to him, and he stayed for 6 weeks with him. But he had never seen his daughters. So he's like, when he left, his daughters were little baby girls. And then when he came back, they're like preteens now. So that's a lot emotionally for him to go through. It's a lot for me to go through, because now it was a matter of, I'm a single parent, basically. He was making money down there, but it wasn't enough to send back to the family here. So I'm a single parent. Work is getting difficult. Financially and emotionally, it's getting very difficult. And stuff was happening where I was almost losing my house. The car payments were behind, and it was just I ended up having to put the house up for sale. But then within 2 weeks, we get the call that he's approved. And so I'm like, okay, we'll pull that out, and we'll figure out, we'll do whatever. My parents helped, my mom helped, some of his family helped, my cousins helped. Said, okay, we'll help you pay for everything. So that comes through. And one thing that I talked about, and what Jared and I talked about was, It was financially difficult, it was emotionally difficult, but I knew we had a huge support system here in Fort Wayne in Indiana and surrounding areas that I was not going to starve. Me and the children were not going to starve. Yes, I may lose the house, but I was not going to be homeless. I was going to live, I could live with my mom or live with my cousin or somebody. That was not going to be something I had to deal with, like living on the streets in that aspect. It was going to be difficult for sure, but I knew I had the support system where it wouldn't be tragic. And so that was one thing that kept coming up later on as I'm starting to go through these different obstacles. Just looking at different perspectives, going back to the pictures here of what does it look like when you're in that thought of what's the worst case scenario here. That's not going to happen. We'll go 2 or 3 up, that's from there, and kind of figure out, okay, this is the best route to go from there. So on my son's 9th birthday, we actually meet my husband in Chicago and kind of go from there, and we are a big family again. We're reunited, everything's going well, he's approved. We don't have to keep looking over our shoulders. Things are happening where we're definitely going to be helping, and my kids are enjoying having their dad back again. And so life is great for another 3 or 4 years. And then life just happens. May of, 15 is when I started Paul's Place. So probably 17, May of 2017, he says, I don't want to be married to you anymore. Guess I was too ambitious for him. So we start that whole process, sell the house. Actually, we were planning on moving anyway because my oldest daughter was going to high school, and we wanted to be closer to her high school in the south end of town. She went to Wayne New Tech. So the move was planned. I sold the house. We moved into a new house, but the divorce was not. So now going through that financially. So we're going through a divorce. We're going through moving. I'm going through a job change as well. Actually, I left my full-time job a year before thinking I was going to get a salary with Paul's Place now, because in March of 2017, we'd start housing families, and in that year was going to get grants to be able to pay me as an executive director. So I left full-time job anticipating that, and when he went back to work in the restaurant industry, that was the plan. He's like, okay, right before we got divorced, he said, I'll work more money with the retail, with restaurant. We'll pay off all our bills, and that will give you the flexibility to move, to go, take the kids to school, be there for the games, doctor's appointments, all of that, and then you can work Paul's Place as well. I'm like, okay, that sounds great. Let's do that. And then 2 months later, that's when he asked for a divorce. So going through all of that now, having the house, going through a divorce, again, life happens. COVID hits again as well. So all the funding with Paul's Place has now dropped. There's no grants, no foundations are giving any kind of money away. Any events we're having, they have to be switched to virtual events. And virtual events for us at that point, because we were so small, we didn't have a big audience. A lot of the funding dropped as well from there. So luckily we had the PPP loans to come through to be able to continue to pay me. So when I told the board at that time, because we had 3 apartments, things were going well, but we didn't have, now all the funding was gone. So I said, okay, in order to keep Paul's Place alive, in order to keep this mission going, do not pay me. Make sure the organization continues on. Because if we don't renew the 3 apartments, there's no way we're going to be able to build up enough momentum to keep Paul's Place going. So that's what they did. We did not renew 2 of the apartments. We kept the 1, and there was 2 months there. During 2 months, for 2 weeks, I did not get paid. So of course my bills again got backed up. And I was kind of back in that same situation from before. But then again, I knew the kids were going to be able to stay with their dad. We actually have a very great co-parenting relationship, so he wasn't going to be vindictive or anything, so he could easily take the kids. He's not going to let them starve. I could always live with my mom or somebody, my cousin or somebody else. I was not going to starve. I was not going to be homeless on the streets, and I knew there was a way out. It was definitely grim, but it wasn't that bad where I was literally going to be walking on the streets. And I knew I could figure out a way to make income as well. So I think that's where my a lot of my side hustles came in during that time, was to figure out, okay, I don't want to go to a 9-to-5 job because I have other responsibilities I need to take care of. What am I going to do to figure out how to get money coming in? So that's kind of where that mentality really came from. So lots of obstacles going back and forth, of lots of highs and lows. And that kind of leads me to the next presentation, or the next slides. So eventually we started a podcast called Embracing Adversity, and this is really just all about life as well. Really the main thing as I'm going through, as I'm figuring out, walking through myself through the process, is adverse situation happens. We all know that. What's really important is we have to acknowledge it, understand why it happened, maybe not fully understand, but see, okay, this and this happened, and now that's happened. And then we also have to look for new perspectives on everything. And then from there, once we see those new perspectives, the different views on everything, then we need to begin the transition to be able to embrace your adversity. So what do I mean by, of course, we all know there's our expectations, and then that's what really happens. Definitely not the straight line of what I wanted to do, graduate, get a good job, get married, have kids, and all of that, and have a great, illustrious career. That didn't happen, obviously. But it's kept me thinking, it's not going to always be that way. Be prepared for some obstacles to come through, because sometimes you are going to be turning back and going back to where you were before. And then the same thing over here. So just understand that nothing's perfect, and you can't really expect it to be, because that's just life. That's the way things happen. Acknowledge, feel the feels. I'm not telling you not to be depressed. Don't cry. You have to feel those emotions. You have to understand. You just really have to go through this whole process the way you can. Try not to keep thinking about them continuously, but also try to realize what happened. Sometimes we never understand exactly why it happened, but we can see steps of something of this and that happened, so this is probably why it led to that. And remember that, because that's going to be important in the future. If that situation comes up again, I remember when this happened, this is the way I can help that. That would be a good way to kind of go through the next process. And that's really where the growth comes from, really, is trying to understand the base feelings of everything that happened. So look for new perspectives. 3 questions to ask yourself. Will I still be able to find income? Yes, I can find income one way or another, going back to McDonald's to get work, or for a short time, or finding a side hustle somewhere to make money. Will I still be able to eat? Will my kids starve? No, because they have this. There's shelters, there's canned food drives, there's these things that are in place for people to have food. And then will I have shelter? You may not have your house you had before, but there's Airbnbs, there's family situations, there's different places, there's different resources here within town that may not be as expensive what you had before, but it's still shelter. You're not going to be living on the streets in that aspect. And there's different things and resources around. You just really have to ask people. So to begin the transformation to embrace your adversity, what does that mean? Look around. Who's around me that can help emotionally? You need that support system. That's the key thing that you really need to have. Your best friend, your parent, your spouse, if you're still together, maybe not your children, but you can still learn from your children. They can understand the situation without really going in depth. You really have mentors, coworkers, resources. There's so many resources nowadays. There's toll-free lines, there's websites, everything. There's so much stuff out there. You just really have to look to find out, okay, how am I going to get out of this situation? Are the resources available for worst case scenario? If I'm totally going to lose my house, but I don't know anyone here in Fort Wayne, what's here? Well, there's Vincent Village House, I believe. There's Aaron's house. There's lots of different places. But if you do happen to have a little bit of income, there's also Airbnbs. I've actually managed Airbnbs, so I know people were in transition all the time. They're staying here for a couple nights. It may not be an ideal situation, but you're not out in the elements. And what have I learned to bounce forward? Not necessarily get back to where you are, but eventually get back to where you've had that growth, and you can see that growth, and you can show what growth you've been through. That's the whole feeling the feels. I remember what it was like being there. I definitely don't want to be there again. So I'm going to do everything I can to avoid situations like that. And what have I learned to prevent it? Or a similar situation. Okay, there's different things, and hopefully you're being more aware of what's happening around you that you can see, oh, those are the red flags I saw earlier but didn't really pay attention to. We all do it. I do still do it. Those are different things that you can look for. Just always be observant. That's one thing my father taught me, especially as a young female. Always be observant of everything around you. Who's around you? What businesses are there? Are there security cameras? Are there resources? What's involved in the community? What's there? I have a lot of people here and different here in the community that provide food for the homeless, work in different shelters, work in different emotional support systems, work at Fort Recovery. I know a lot of people connected around the city that if someone were to come here from a different area, then I know where to point them to. And I know where to go if certain situations happen again. So always be connected, really. Always be observant of what's going on around you. And so some things that really kind of put us all into perspective, that kind of like, oh yeah, that's what happened, and that's what they call that, what I was doing. Grit. I know a lot of you probably heard about that book. The Grit, the Power of Passion and Perseverance. That's by Angela Duckworth. Stretch. Actually, I just started my MBA last week, so those are the topics actually I was talking about that we're teaching, and I'm like, oh, this is perfect. That leads right into my presentation today. So Stretch is by Carrie Willward, Barbara Mistick, and Joseph Grenny, and really that just talks about when you're going through adverse situations, what can you do? Kind of basically the same thing I said is just really kind of help look for the resources around you. Know that there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And know there's people there around in your community that will help you. You just need to start asking. And so that's where kind of Paul's places kind of come from. I went through that tragic situation with my father. I knew it was going to be something better. I knew just the makeup of Fort Wayne, of being a bigger city, but drawing in from a lot of communities outside of Fort Wayne, that people needed services like this for Paul's Place. And so going through the adverse situation, this is where I was able to bounce forward, was creating something for other people in the community to be able to go through or be somewhat comfortable as they're going through a harsh time. And like I said, you always have to be observant. When I was on that walk, I wasn't quite fast enough. I don't know if you can see this because I couldn't quite take the picture. That's the same pathway, but there's 2 deer. Actually, there was 3. I can only see 2 in this picture. I'm just walking, quiet morning, and there's 3 deer in the trees, literally 200 feet away from me. So when you're observant, you can see God's nature around you. It may not be the help you need, but it helps get you into the mindset of being peaceful. Okay, I'm in a peaceful environment now. Now I need to take the next step, and go forward, bounce forward. And that's that. Thank you.